I had seen a post earlier today. I don't even remember who posted it because when I went back to look, you know how that works sometimes on Facebook where you're certain you saw something that was really interesting that you're like, I don't have the time to read it, but I want to go back. And I looked up 4 or 5 different people that I thought might have made the post, but I can't find it for the life of me now. What the post was about was talking about local shows. And it's a subject matter I've talked about before. So what it was covering was the number of them. And it was the reason it stuck in my mind was because there was a weird correlation that happened with another post that I had seen in another group that had to do with selling on Etsy. And the third point that is kind of connected to this is something that I just went through here not that long ago, which was pretty screwball. The unifying factor between all three of them is an overabundance of expectations, I guess, and then not enough understanding about how things are affecting creatives. Personally, there are very few shows in the Kansas City area that I have been able to do where I've sold. Without exception, no, that's not totally true. I was about to say without exception, but no, there are some fairly recent and big exceptions to this. For the most part, when I leave the state and I do shows in other areas, I make better money. Overall, I make more, I make better connections, I get following on social media. Things happen differently outside of Kansas City, the greater Kansas City area. There are certainly outliers that it did not happen. The most infamous example for myself is having attended C2E2, but I fully admit that was 100% on me. I had forgotten a lot of my equipment, my setup, my gear. So most people that were walking by were like, why is this hairy dude sitting at this table and what does he have? Because everything is laying flat. Everyone else has got great setups and I really didn't have much going on. But so I had seen this post initially where somebody was talking about the advent of so many shows. Like you literally cannot go a month, it seems, anymore without tripping over at least 2 or 3 within a 60-mile radius happening of some sort. Mini cons, micro cons, something like that. Now, I've been going to a lot of the smaller shows because I tend to like to slow down and enjoy talking to vendors and really taking my time looking at things and not feeling like I have to get out of the way of a swath of other people behind me or something. I'm also not a fan of places like, I had gone to CollectorCon, and if it had not been for going with my brother, I don't think I would have liked the show that much. It was very generic. It was one of those traveling thematic shows that they try and come in and like they always advertise over 900 vendors, over all this other stuff, and it's a lot of marketing hoopla. That comes in, and that can also take out a lot of money from the local economy. And although I did see a few local vendors and I think a few creatives were doing the show, it really didn't hit me as something that was anything I'd ever want to go back to again. There are the big monster shows in this area: Planet Comic Con, Planet Anime, NakaCon, the larger shows that have had a legacy for quite a few years. And when you go to those, you really feel like you're in the mix, you're having a good time. It does cost a lot to go to these shows. And of course, the vendor rooms and artist alleys are filled with a lot of stuff, to purchase, to look at, that sort of thing. But I had seen something that correlated with the comment that there were so many shows in the area that you could, what was happening with all these shows and how much harder it's becoming, and everything from that to how much it costs to go to the shows, which I can completely understand that. I think when you go to a bigger show and the moment you walked in before, if you've gotten your tickets beforehand or your band or whatever, you've probably already spent, at least for 1 or 2 people, between $40 to $70, $80. And then there's parking, and then there's all the other stuff, and then getting in there and food and all that other stuff. Now, I understand it's kind of like going to Disneyland, kind of, where you're making a lot of plans and probably going a little bit in debt to go to places like this, or maybe you've saved up, whatever it is, but it is an investment of your time and money to go to something like this. What does end up happening is there are people that specifically like the pageantry and the exposure and everything that happens with a larger show. That's why there are people that go to places like SDCC and Gen Con and Dragon Con and things. They like these big events, and they like them for multitudes of reasons, not just because of their huge size, but because there's a lot to do there and a lot to see. And then you have all the stuff going on in the town around it. Well, the reason I'm connecting that to two other things is because the more shows that end up happening in an area, the less I feel people. This happens more, at least on the artist level, and there have been people I've spoken to that feel fairly similar to me on this, where you have so many shows, and if wallets and time are divided, time off, weekends off, things like that are all kind of divided up among where you're going to go, you end up with this butterfly effect of, well, I'll catch you at the next show, or do you have a website online? There's a lot of things that people will talk about, and I'm not knocking anybody. Believe me, I'm no stranger to having to budget money and time and effort to make things happen. There are some months where I'm like, oh shit, I could really be in trouble. And that's a little bit of a harrowing experience. But it's the life I chose, and it's what I enjoy. And quite frankly, I have no desire to ever go back to corporate America in any permanent form. And quite frankly, I enjoy being able to go and stand in a Hy-Vee on a Tuesday at like 1:30 in the afternoon if I need to go buy something. That's a freedom I'm not willing to exchange, And you never know when your time's going to be up, so you might as well enjoy it while you can. So with the with that sort of thought process in there, I started thinking about this other post I'd seen that were a bunch of Etsy sellers. I no longer have an Etsy store. In fact, I actually have no online store, and that's a whole nother thing, but I don't really see the reason for it. I've never really managed to sell very much online. I've had little hiccups here and there, but for the most part, I just don't sell anywhere. And I've had Gumroad, I've had Etsy, I've set up my Square store before. I've done a bunch of different things, and none of them ever really panned out for me. It's always been in person where I can swing that sales pitch and get somebody to really invest in what it is. Some of it may be the gift of the gab. Some of it may be that, I have a little bit of Riz. Oh God. Right when I said that, I felt so fucking cheesy. Charisma. I'm going to use the real word. I'm too old to use the Riz. Sounds like somebody that would be performing on open mic night and trying to break into like alternative comedy. That's what that sounds like. I probably should try. No, I'm not going to try that. It's a terrible idea. But if you go into the idea of what most of these Etsy people were saying, Etsy's been inundated with the fact there's a lot of dropship stuff and a lot less handmade stuff out there. And then there's that whole aspect of arguing over what is handmade, what isn't, that sort of thing. There's that. But there's such a proliferation of different things that you can go to. Recently, I found out, and I did some looking into this, because normally when you see those memes that'll come by or like informational blurbs that people will share, they were talking specifically about Temu and Shein, which are two Chinese companies that I knew this from a while back. They are absolutely trying to do everything they can to establish a connection point here in the United States and in a lot of different countries as cheap and powerful drop shipping capacities. And you end up with so much stuff. You end up with so many things out there, and you can buy things for certain amounts. I mean, like, even in the TikTok shop right now, there's a bunch of scissors that are essentially just the exact same thing as EMT scissors that Leatherman makes. Well, Leatherman tools are about $90. Those scissors, and I've used one pair in my life, and I was like, I got to get something like this. And if you go on TikTok and you look up Leatherman knockoff or anything else like that, or EMT scissors, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So the few people I have seen that have reviewed it, some have been EMTs and firefighters and policemen and different survivalists and stuff, and they all highly recommend it. They're like, there's no difference. It just doesn't have Leatherman etched on it. So that is a wonderful thing in one regard. But the other thing that is happening is that regardless of the price that Leatherman is setting for it, or any of these companies that have knockoffs coming into the area, at first for people in general, it's like, oh, I got this amazing deal and this is great. And that's cool. That same mindset is also transpiring when you order things from Amazon, because you can also order something and return it with little to no problem, right? They do so much en masse volume shipping and selling that they can take that hit, they can take that hurt. And today when I was at the Independence Mall, which is a dying mall, Kansas City has one mall left that's actually halfway decent, the Overland Park one, which is where I normally frequent. But the Independence Mall literally looked like the end of the world. And I had taken some footage, but I was like, and I might have a clip that I'll play here in a second, I'm not sure, but it was so depressing I didn't even want to film. And it was just a lot of weird stores in there now, but one of them that I ran across was a store that sold nothing but Amazon returns. And this is nothing new. There are a ton of stores that specialize in stuff like that. We have Cargo Largo, we have Retail Rebel, there's another Amazon clearance house not that far from here. There's a bunch of things like that. And all of that stuff is also inundating and getting people's attention and pocketbook. Now, there's a reason why I'm connecting all this. When you have a bunch of things that start to indoctrinate people into the idea that something should cost only a certain amount of money, then you run the risk of everything being viewed that way. It is, and I promise you, if you know anyone that's been selling on Etsy, they probably have dealt with people going, why didn't I get this in 2 days? Well, I had to go to the post office. I had to wrap it. I had to ship it. I'm one person. I'm a group of people. I'm a small company. I'm whatever. And when that sort of stuff happens, it starts to wear us down. That same effect is happening with a lot of the shows as well. Even for people on that Etsy post who were talking about how there's a proliferation of craft shows. I'm not even joking. At some point in time, how many of these can you have? Exactly how many of these damn things can exist out there? And the weirdest part is, I was actually part of a show where I was asked, this has happened on more than one occasion, and where I've been asked, what are some ideas you'd like to bring to the table? I tend to think outside of the box and try and think about the experience of people when they go to a show, what they would want to see, right? What would elevate it more for people that have kids or the people that are just going as a couple or maybe one person going by themselves. What can you do to make these shows stand out? One of the things I often start with is don't emulate the other shows. Don't try and be everything at the same time. The reason I say that is because not only are you as a showrunner ending up bringing on a shit ton of responsibility upon yourself, you begin to lose focus. And this isn't true of everyone, but for a good number of shows that I've seen, people tend to lose focus on what they do really well, why they started it in the first place, because, well, they're doing this when they're doing this and this is happening here. Yeah, that's great. But I've been to enough shows. And I mean, and if you guys have followed me on my website or even seen any of the videos on here, I've been going to shows for well over 10 years, and a lot of them, if I'm not working at them, I'm attending them. When I go to these shows, you can feel that there are some shows that try to do everything and end up with nothing that makes them stand out uniquely. And that doesn't matter the size, because it could be the big ones and it could be the small ones. And then there are some shows that find that niche and they work so well. They're just a comic show. They're just a toys and collectibles show. They are just an art show. They are whatever, right? There's certain things that they permeate that aspect and they stick with it and they stay with it. And I like that. There's nothing wrong. I'm not trying to say, oh, don't bring cosplay. I'm not trying to say don't bring miniature wargaming. Not saying that. I am saying that it's okay to have a more refined procedure when it comes to producing a show of some kind, and that your entry fees and what you have at the show should completely reflect the spirit of what that show is supposed to stand for. But everything today is a pop culture show. Every single time, there's not a show I haven't been to that hasn't had at least 3 or 4 pop vinyl vendors, that hasn't had grading and like rows and rows and rows and vendors of collectible card game vendors or whatever. You know, you start to see it over and over again. And I'm not knocking any of those people. I am not. What I am saying is, after a while, the repetition, it starts to glaze you over. And especially these last 2 years that I hadn't been doing as many shows and I had simply been attending them. Walk a showroom floor, especially if you've been a vendor. Don't pay for a booth. Go to a show. Walk that show. See how overwhelmed you get. See how tired you get of seeing the same bullshit over and over again. And again, this is not a knock. I'm saying that even if the work is spectacular, the best fan art, the best original works, whatever it is, the input, the intake is so overwhelming. And it's probably already a bit of a shock too if you go there and to get in was expensive, or you get there and maybe the show doesn't really live up to the hype, or There's just nothing fascinating for all members of the family. Like, it's a tenuous bridge to kind of traverse, right? Because on one side, I can understand where showrunners are trying to make something that works for everybody. But when you have a multitude of these shows spread out over the course of a year, nothing is special anymore. Now, it could still be like if you go outside of it and you end up doing one in Topeka, that's great. That hits a specific source, and people are going to go to that one because there's not really much happening out there. If you go and do one in fucking Odessa, Missouri, like, people are probably gonna be like, "Whoa, what is that?" And probably go to something like that. I'm saying that there's probably one out in Odessa. I don't know. I actually don't know that. I'm just using examples here. But watching what even the Etsy people were talking about, with not just dealing with the incursion of a lot of Chinese dropship stuff, and the fact that Etsy is no longer really a handmade marketplace, and it hasn't been for a long time. They're also facing the same thing with shows. I read through over 100 comments of different people, talking about how it's getting harder and harder to compete. It's getting harder and harder to do things. One could blame COVID, right? A lot of people had downtime. Some people started streaming and creating YouTube content. Some people started finding other hobbies. Some people took in animals and then unfortunately fucking returned them after they went back to work. Some people decided to rebuild their house, or, they were flush with cash, which we were not. It was like not that much money. Fucking McConnell. But the point I'm making here is the fact that there seems to be a general sense of malaise that is wiping over everyone. It doesn't matter your age, your political background, your religious beliefs. None of that shit matters when it comes to the idea that if you guys have been able to walk into that store that I saw the Amazon returns on, and you begin to think about, like, how fucking wasteful are we? How much are we trying to get a goddamn dopamine hit? Trying to relive nostalgia, trying to do all of these things. And it's all for the sake of just feeling good for a little bit. I say this as somebody who does go to therapy. I'm saying this as somebody who does suffer from clinical depression, who has some real low moments. I'll give you a perfectly good reason here. And I know a lot of people would say this is in poor taste, but this is an actual thing that happened. I had two clients. One that it was too good to be true, but I had one client that I met with, and it was for a massive mural. If you're on YouTube right now watching this, you can probably go to the community section and guess which mural it was. And it did not get the result I thought it was going to get. Long story short, I basically went through the whole thing. It was like the stages of of getting into something and being thrown out the door at the same time. Basically, the meeting went really well. There's a lot of good camaraderie. Things were going really well. Everything knocked the design out of the ballpark on the first try. They loved it. And then it was supposed to have been a $20,000 job this was in an area that the wall was huge. It was going to be painted on. And then a phone call comes where the person in charge, who I know damn well saw the contract and saw the pricing, said, I just didn't think it was going to cost that much. Now, this is roughly the equivalent of, if I remember the dimensions were like, I think it was like 25 feet by 17 feet tall. I was going to have to get a scissor lift. There was going to be a lot of things that were going to have to be involved with it. And it had a house and some other stuff, like a lot of details on there as I dropped my cap. A lot of different details on it. It was going to take the better part of 2 weeks to make it for a deadline that they had happening. Everyone was very nice. Everyone was very cool. Broke bread with them, ate a meal there with them, everything else like that. And for any of you that know me in person, I can talk to anybody about anything. And that's not bragging. The main reason is because I like to ask a lot of questions. I don't know everything, but I like to. I like to try and learn. So I have a genuine interest. And this client also created some equipment and stuff that I really liked. I already followed them on Instagram. So the next thing that happens is this phone call comes, and that person is like, well, I was just really shocked by the price. I thought I'd be able to get it for around $2,500. And as the phone call went on and the silence on this end just stayed there silent, more in shock than anything, he managed to kind of weasel his way back up to about $10,000. And I know that there are people that are probably like, you shouldn't talk, about that stuff, but saying this because for anyone out there who tries to do murals or tries to do freelance or tries to do anything else like that, you understand what I'm talking about. And for the other people that have never been through this sort of thing, there are people that will absolutely walk you right up to that gate and go, here you go, here are the keys, here's this, and then suddenly turn around and go, nope. I kind of want that for half. I kind of want that for less than half. And it devastates you. Because although you shouldn't count your eggs before they're hatched, that old adage, that old saying, you still start to think, okay, I'll be able to get, I can use this to fund attending this show. I can now open up and apply for these other shows. I can do this. Probably bad form. And I will be the first one to admit that, right? Pretty terrible form. But if you feel like something is going through, that's great. Fast forward to no less than about a week and a half later, I have another client that I have been working on their revisions for 3 smaller murals for a while. The most myopic and detail-oriented insanity, at the same time, the most unequivocally general input on what they want. So it's literally like one of those circumstances, and for anyone that does graphic design or illustration, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say this. I'll know it when I see it. That's fine. Every single change is going to be a certain amount of money. I had already done some work, and the previous ones had gone through without a hitch. They were a little pricey, but they weren't terrible because they included revisions and some additional stuff that needed to be done, but not a big deal. This one got out of hand quickly on all 3. And when it did, the pushback was immediate. The contract was sent in, half was due. They didn't even finish reading the contract, which did have the full price. An email was received on this end that simply said, what is the full price? Then later, one came back saying, I'm going to paraphrase here, so I'm not calling this client out directly, but it needs to be said for people that are out there trying to do this sort of thing. This is something you might encounter. They were shocked. They were sort of surprised. They didn't know what to do. It was so much money, but they didn't know what to do because so much time had gone by. Let me be the first one to say this. In a lot of circumstances, you are probably going to have to figure out, even if you don't have a lot of money coming in, unless it's absolutely dire, be prepared to walk away from something. Or at the very least, be prepared to stand your ground on what you're worth. Over the years that I've done freelance and worked in different places and been asked by people at shows or in passing to do projects, I have been offered everything from like, I'll give you a month's worth of smoothies for this mural. Oh, if you draw my comic book, we'll split it halfway after we get everything done. There's so many things like that. In fact, if you're watching the videos that are uploading, a bunch of them are going to be in the TikTok playlist. There's a bunch of unfinished projects in there that never came together because they just really didn't work out, or they lost interest, or they didn't want to pay, or whatever. Those are the sort of circumstances that, sort of beleaguer people in the creative zone. Because not only do we have to deal with the advent of so many shows happening, and then trying to choose the right one to go to, or hoping that, you're going to make back some money at those shows. You're also dealing with the fact that there is a rising amount of people, at least in my experience, and from what I'm reading online, that are less willing to spend on things, and are also the source of people that if they order something, will probably use it and then return it immediately to Amazon, or will be the sort of people that will, immediately raise a dispute on Etsy and or leave you a 1-star rating and then demand to get their money back. It is damn near impossible. And there are so many fucking videos on YouTube here where you will see these stupid ass things that say, I made 10K. Follow me. Watch my 4-step plan on how to make 10K a month as an artist. When you really start to dig through the weeds, those are disingenuous at best. Yes, there are some people making money, but they are also speaking from a platform where they already have a lot of followers, and if you go back through their playlists, it is a lot of this malarkey where they're telling you, if you follow me, if you do this, I can show you how to make this money. It's like all this stuff, just like that ridiculous workout thing for V-Shred. by the way, fuck V Shred, okay? There's so many people out there that are willing to do whatever they can to get your money, and there's plenty of people that are doing everything they possibly can to make sure you don't get their money. And it is such a weird time to be a creative person. Everything seems to be working against you. But I'm going to end this on a positive note. Even as much shit as I go through, I do remember that I do have some clients and friends and people that do help, that are there for me. But the truth is that one of the hardest things to overcome is understanding that if you run a business and you are a sole proprietor, or you're just part of a collective group or something like that, every single time that something comes up that scares you, that you're like worried about doing, right? Like one of my biggest things is going consistently live. I don't really like the idea of it because I'm not completely prepared mentally for it. And I feel like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about for an hour and a half? But I've already been running my fucking mouth for 25 minutes. I always think to myself, like, what could I share with people? What would I be able to do? And I have been told this: if you're yourself, if you are genuinely open to questions and willing to share your creative aspect or whatever information, if you're a good cook, if you know how to fish, if you like walking through parts of nature, if you like, clearly here on YouTube, one of the things that's been hitting off well has been you guys have been enjoying, because the views have been showing it, most of my tool review stuff and like the camera history things I've been sharing, which, thank you, by the way, that's freaking amazing. So the point is, diversification can be a very good thing. It doesn't matter if you're running a show. It doesn't matter if you're trying to keep your business afloat. It doesn't matter if you're questioning how you're going to bring money in next month. Diversification can happen in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't mean that you have to do everything. It just means, what else could you possibly look at? What angle have you not explored that would make you stand out and be something that isn't so much a what if, as much of, I need that in my life. Yeah. And that's actually where I'm at. Like, so as soon as I get done here, I've got work, of course, like normal. I've got to get done. Not a lot of it this time though. And I've got some other things I've got to think about as far as what I can do, because those two, like one contract is right now hanging in the balance, and I'm going to see how that's going to go. And then the other one is dead, is dead on arrival, which when that happens, I'm glad that I took the chance and I went ahead and scheduled some shows, and those are paid for. And some of them, thank goodness, aren't going to cost me really much of anything, but it's still one of those things where this throws into real worry as a creative, like, how is next year going to work? And some of the shows that I held off on were simply because, I either didn't know how these projects were going to go or what time was going to happen. So I end up like trying to make the best decision I can in that moment. And that is the hardest thing for any creative. So I'm going to end this by saying that if you're either somebody who's been making stuff for a long time or somebody who's just getting into it, really think about it before you decide you're going to quit or give up. Because I'll be honest, this being a creative is not an easy job, especially freelance. You're going to eat it more than anything. You're going to get I certainly found that out when I was really active being a voice actor, and especially now with the advent of AI and people doing that shit. But you will find work. It can happen. There are opportunities. In fact, today I just found out about another mural opportunity I'm going to put in for. So it's not like because you never know what tomorrow holds. You never do. And not getting too personal on this, but with the advent of some things that have happened in my life here recently, where some people I'd known had passed on from sickness and old age and stuff, and then a good dear friend of mine found out that they have cancer. You start to really think about what you're doing in life. I know I did, and I have been for quite a while. When you start to think about, when you meditate or when you wake up in the morning and you start to think about the things you're grateful for, you're reminded that in the blink of an eye, anything can change. And when I get really angry and when I get really upset and I feel down, I have to remind myself, like, this is helping nothing. Yes, you shouldn't hold it in. Find an outlet, do something. But, which can be hard enough. But there's a lot of times whenever the best thing, and this is something I remind myself of every day, is push through. Do the best you can. Or listen to your mind, listen to your body, listen to yourself. And if you're really fucking tired, take that day off. Take some time off. Take an hour off. Whatever you need, whatever you can afford. And just let things go for a little bit. I promise you, whatever challenges or issues or problems or fun things you want to do will more than likely still be there. Thanks for watching, guys. I am Mari the Artisan Rogue. And I did not mean for this to go that long, but I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for watching and for all the other stuff you do by like commenting and following on here. That's been great. I really do appreciate it. I thank all of you that are watching the photography stuff. That makes me so happy. By the time this drops, I think, yeah, I'm going to upload this right now. So there'll also be a video for the, I think it's episode 4 for the camera stuff. And I've got, I think, 2 more episodes of that coming out still. Yeah, I do. Looking here right in front of me, I've still got some more components I want to go over and then one more item. So I'm hoping all that works out. And yeah, but I'll explain more of that later. Go to bed. Go to bed. I'll catch you guys later.